Jake worked quickly to set up what his father would have called a complex ambush system. Multiple traps and obstacles designed to channel prey into a killing zone. The difference was that this time, Jake was not hunting deer or elk. He was hunting intelligent predators that could think and adapt. "I need everyone to understand their role," Jake said as he positioned rope snares between the artificial trees. "This will only work if we act like a coordinated hunting party." "Most of our species do not have hunting parties," one of the students pointed out nervously. "Then we will have to learn fast," Jake replied. "Cora, you will be my second in command. Your warrior training makes you the best choice to coordinate the others." Cora nodded and stood straighter. "What do you need me to do?" "Position 3 students at each of these locations," Jake said, pointing to spots he had marked with torn pieces of cloth. "When the Void Stalkers enter the trap area, each group will make noise and movement to drive them toward the center. UI. Want us to deliberately attract their attention?" Zix asked from his position in the tree. "I want you to control their attention," Jake corrected. "There is a difference between random noise that causes panic and purposeful noise that guides behavior." Jake continued explaining his plan while he finished setting up the traps. The idea was to use the Void Stalkers' pack hunting instincts against them. They would expect prey to run away from threats, not toward specific locations. By controlling their movement patterns, Jake hoped to get them all into position for one coordinated attack. "Professor Veltar, I need you to be ready to change the environmental controls on my signal," Jake said. "When I give the word, I want complete darkness for exactly 10 seconds, then full bright lighting." "What will that accomplish?" she asked. "Void Stalkers have excellent night vision, but they need time to adjust when lighting changes rapidly. 10 seconds of darkness will give us an advantage, and the sudden bright light will blind them temporarily." The sound of approaching predators ended their preparation time. The Void Stalkers were returning, and Jake could tell from their movement patterns that they had developed a new strategy. They were approaching from multiple directions simultaneously, moving more carefully than before. "Remember, wait for my signal," Jake whispered as he took his position at the center of the trap area. "No matter what happens, do not break formation until I tell you." The first Void Stalker appeared at the edge of the clearing, moving low and cautious. It tested the air for scents and listened carefully before advancing. Behind it, Jake could see movement that indicated the rest of the pack was spreading out for a coordinated assault. "Now," Jake whispered, and the alien students began their part of the plan. The noise they made was not the panicked sounds of prey, animals. Instead, they created purposeful sounds designed to make the Void Stalkers think there were threats coming from multiple directions. Cora used her warrior training to make challenging sounds that drew attention to her position. Zix dropped small rocks from his tree to create the impression of movement in the canopy. The Void Stalkers reacted exactly as Jake had hoped. Their pack instincts told them to respond to multiple threats by consolidating their position and attacking the most dangerous opponent first. Since Jake had established himself as the primary threat, they began moving toward his location. One by one, the predators entered the trap area. They moved carefully, having learned to respect Jake's ability to set snares and obstacles. But they were so focused on avoiding the traps they could see that they did not notice the ones they could not see. The first Void Stalker triggered a rope snare that wrapped around its back leg. The creature was not seriously injured, but it was off balance and struggling to free itself. The second predator tried to help its packmate and stepped into another snare. "Phase 2, Jake called out, and the students began making different sounds designed to confuse rather than threaten. The effect was to make the Void Stalkers uncertain about where the real threats were located. The pack leader, still limping from Jake's earlier attack, entered the clearing and immediately recognized that they were in a trap. It began calling to the others with urgent warning sounds, but it was too late. Most of the pack was already committed to their attack positions. "Now, Professor Veltar," Jake shouted. The biodome plunged into complete darkness. For exactly 10 seconds, nobody could see anything. Jake used those seconds to move from his original position to a spot behind the largest group of Void Stalkers. When the lights came back on at full intensity, the predators were temporarily blinded and completely confused about where their primary target had gone. Jake was no longer acting defensively. He moved through the disoriented pack with the metal rod, striking quick, precise blows that were designed to injure rather than kill. His father had taught him that wounded predators were often more dangerous than healthy ones, but they were also more likely to retreat rather than continue fighting. The Void Stalkers found themselves in a situation they had never encountered before. They were pack hunters being hunted by a coordinated group that included their original prey. The tactical advantage they normally enjoyed through superior numbers and coordination had been turned against them. "Drive them toward the exit," Jake called to the students as he continued his attack on the confused predators. "Give them a way to retreat with dignity." Cora understood immediately and began directing the other students to open a corridor toward one of the sealed exits. The message was clear. The Void Stalkers could continue fighting a dangerous opponent who had already proven capable of hurting them, or they could withdraw and look for easier prey. The pack leader made the decision that showed why it had survived long enough to become alpha. It called the pack to retreat, and one by one the Void Stalkers began moving toward the exit. They moved carefully, keeping their eyes on Jake and the other students, but they were definitely withdrawing. When the last predator had disappeared through the emergency exit that Professor Veltar opened remotely, Jake finally allowed himself to relax. He sat down heavily on one of the artificial rocks and realized his hands were shaking slightly from adrenaline. "Is it over?" Zix asked as he climbed down from his tree. "For now," Jake replied. "Pack hunters do not usually return to hunting grounds, where they have been defeated, but we should stay alert until security arrives." The sound of approaching aircraft announced the arrival of Academy security forces. Within minutes, the biodome was filled with armed personnel in protective gear who seemed surprised to find the students alive and relatively unharmed. "Where are the Void Stalkers?" the security commander asked Professor Veltar. "Jake Morrison drove them off," she replied, and Jake noticed that her voice contained a mixture of amazement and something that might have been respect. The security commander looked at Jake with obvious skepticism. "One student drove off an entire pack of adult Void Stalkers?" "He did not just drive them off," Cora said firmly. "He hunted them. I have never seen anything like it." Over the next hour, Jake found himself answering questions from security personnel, academy administrators, and xenobiologists who seemed fascinated by what had happened. He tried to explain his actions in simple terms, but it was clear that most of the questioners found his account difficult to believe. "Mr. Morrison, Void Stalkers are classified as Class 10 predators," said Dr. Nexavar, the Academy's head of xenobiology. "Military units require advanced weapons and armor to handle them safely." "How did you manage to defeat them with improvised tools?" "I did not defeat them," Jake corrected for what felt like the 100th time. "I convinced them that hunting us would cost more than it was worth. That is how you deal with intelligent predators. You make them understand that you are dangerous. Enough to hurt them badly even if they win." But you used hunting tactics against them, Dr. Nexavar continued. Our research indicates that only military-trained personnel from warrior species can effectively hunt Class 10 predators. Jake thought about how to explain something that seemed obvious to him but was apparently revolutionary to galactic science. On Earth, hunting dangerous predators is not a military activity. It is something that people learn for survival, recreation, or food gathering. My father taught me to hunt when I was 12 years old. The assembled academics exchanged looks that Jake was beginning to recognize. It was the same expression they had when he mentioned that humans fished for fun or went camping for recreation. Jake, Professor Veltar said quietly, I think you need to understand something about galactic civilization. Most species evolved from prey animals that survived by hiding, running, or cooperating for defense. The idea of intelligent beings who hunt dangerous predators for any reason other than absolute necessity is almost incomprehensible to us. What about warrior species like Korra's people? Jake asked. The Vegan warrior caste trains for combat. Against other intelligent beings, Korra explained. We learn to fight wars, not to hunt wild predators. What you did today required different skills entirely. Dr. Nexvar activated a recording device. Mr. Morrison, would you be willing to participate in some research studies? Your actions today have implications for our understanding of human capabilities that we need to explore further. Jake's hunting call echoed through the biodome and seemed to confuse the Void Stalkers more than anything else that had happened. They pulled back from their attack positions and began communicating with each other in a series of growls and barks that sounded almost like an argument. The largest of the three creatures stepped forward and fixed its yellow eyes on Jake. This one was clearly the pack leader, and it was trying to decide whether to treat Jake as prey, predator, or something entirely new. Jake could see intelligence in those eyes, dangerous intelligence that was rapidly analyzing the situation. Zix, I need you to watch the pack from above and tell me when they start coordinating again, Jake called up to his roommate in the tree. They are spreading out now, Zix replied. The leader is keeping your attention while the others move to surround you. Jake nodded and began backing toward the student position, but he moved differently than before. Instead of retreating like prey, he moved like a predator, giving ground strategically. He kept the metal rod ready and maintained eye contact with the pack leader. Professor Veltar, I need everyone to listen carefully, Jake said without taking his eyes off the approaching Void Stalkers. We cannot wait for rescue, and running will trigger their hunting instincts. I am going to teach you some basic survival techniques. Jake, we are not warriors, Professor Veltar protested. Most of our species evolved from prey animals. We do not have hunting instincts. You do not need hunting instincts, Jake replied as he continued his strategic retreat. You need teamwork and the willingness to follow instructions. Humans learn to hunt creatures much larger and more dangerous than these by working together. The pack leader made a decision and charged forward. Jake was ready for the attack and sidestepped at the last moment, bringing the metal rod down across the creature's shoulder. The impact was solid enough to make the Void Stalker stumble, but not enough to seriously injure it. More importantly, Jake's counterattack had demonstrated something crucial to the watching students. The Void Stalkers were dangerous, but they were not invincible. They could be hurt, and they could make mistakes. Did you see that? Jake called to the others as he circled away from the pack leader. It committed to the attack too early and could not change direction. That is a weakness we can exploit. Korra stood up from behind the rocks with her ceremonial weapon in her hand. Show me how to fight them, she said. Not fight, hunt, Jake corrected as he avoided another attack. Fighting is about overpowering your opponent. Hunting is about outthinking them. Jake reached into his backpack and pulled out some of the rope he had taken from the maintenance shed. Cora, you and 2 others take this rope and string it between those trees at ankle height. Make it hard to see. What will that accomplish? She asked as she took the rope. Void stalkers are fast and agile, but they are also confident. They do not expect obstacles that are not obviously visible. A trip line will not hurt them much, but it will slow them down and make them more cautious. As Cora and 2 other students began stringing rope between trees, Jake continued his deadly dance with the pack leader. The creature was learning his patterns and getting more accurate with its attacks. Jake knew he could not keep dodging forever. Zix, what are the other pack members doing? Jake asked. 4 of them are circling around to cut off your escape routes, Zix reported. 2 more are approaching the students from the left side. Jake realized the pack was adapting faster than he had hoped. They were treating this like a complex hunt with multiple objectives. He needed to disrupt their coordination before they could execute their full strategy. Professor Veltar, I need you to activate the biodome's environmental controls, Jake said as he rolled behind a tree to avoid claws. Start changing the lighting and weather patterns randomly. The environmental controls are not designed to be used that way, she protested. I do not care what they are designed for. I need you to make this environment as chaotic and unpredictable as possible. Professor Veltar began working with her control device, and within moments the lighting in the biodome started shifting from bright daylight to dim twilight and back again. Artificial rain began falling in some sections while others remained dry. The void. Stalkers did not like the sudden changes. They were adapted to stable environments, and the random shifts in lighting and weather made them nervous. Their coordinated movements became less precise as they struggled to adapt to constantly changing conditions. Jake used the confusion to implement the next part of his plan. Everyone who is not setting traps, I need you to spread out and make noise, he called to the students. Not panic noise, purposeful noise. Make them think there are more of us than there really are. That goes against every instinct my species has, one of the students protested. Your instincts evolved to deal with normal predators, Jake replied as he dodged another attack. These are not normal circumstances. Slowly, the alien students began to overcome their fear and follow Jake's instructions. They spread out through the defensive area and began making sounds that were designed to confuse rather than attract attention. Some used communication devices to create electronic noises. Others found rocks and began creating rhythmic sounds that echoed strangely in the changing environment. The effect on the void stalkers was immediate. Pack hunters relied on being able to track and count their prey accurately. The combination of changing environment, strange sounds, and unexpected obstacles was making it impossible for them to maintain their tactical coordination. It is working, Zix reported from above. The pack is having trouble staying organized. Some of them are moving away from the group. Jake saw his opportunity and took it. Instead of continuing to dodge the pack leader's attacks, he suddenly changed tactics and went on the offensive. He charged toward the creature with the metal rod raised, letting out a yell that sounded like a war cry. The Void Stalker was not prepared for prey to attack it directly. It hesitated for a crucial second, and Jake used that hesitation to land a solid blow across its front leg. The creature stumbled and fell, rolling away from Jake's follow-up attack. For the first time since the encounter began, one of the Void Stalkers showed clear signs of fear. It limped away from Jake and called to the rest of the pack with a sound. That was definitely distress rather than aggression. He hurt the pack leader, Cora said with amazement. A human just defeated an alpha predator in single combat. I did not defeat it, Jake corrected as he kept his eyes on the injured creature. I hurt it enough to make it respect me. There is a difference. The pack dynamics had changed completely. The other Void Stalkers were no longer treating Jake as prey, or even as an unknown threat. They were treating him as a competing predator who had just demonstrated dominance over their leader. What happens now? Professor Veltar asked. Now we find out how smart they really are, Jake replied. Pack hunters have to decide whether to continue fighting a dangerous opponent or look for easier prey. The injured pack leader was communicating with the other Void Stalkers in a series of complex sounds. Jake could not understand the meaning, but the tone was clearly different from their earlier hunting calls. This sounded more like a discussion than attack coordination. Jake, they are backing away, Zix reported. All of them are moving toward the far side of the biodome. Jake allowed himself to relax slightly, but he kept his weapon ready. They are regrouping and reassessing. We have bought ourselves time, but this is not over. What do we do now? Cora asked. She had finished setting up the rope traps and was standing with her ceremonial weapon ready. Now we prepare for round 2, Jake said, because pack hunters do not give up easily and they learn from their mistakes. As if to confirm his words, a new sound echoed through the biodome. It was different from the hunting calls they had heard before. Deeper, more complex, and definitely more organized. The Void Stalkers were not retreating. They were planning. That sounded like a strategy discussion, Professor Veltar observed. It was, Jake agreed. They know we are dangerous now, so they will approach this differently. They will be more careful, more coordinated, and much more deadly. Can we defeat them in a direct confrontation? Cora asked. Jake considered the question carefully before answering. Maybe, if we work together perfectly and have some luck. But I have a better idea. What kind of idea? Zix called down from his tree. The kind that will either save us all or get us killed trying, Jake replied, as he began gathering materials for his most ambitious trap yet. I am going to hunt the entire pack at once. The alien students stared at him as if he had announced his intention to breathe underwater. Even Cora looked skeptical. One human cannot hunt 8 Void Stalkers, she said. You are right, Jake agreed, as he began laying out rope and metal rods in a complex pattern. But one human, plus a team of highly intelligent alien students who are willing to trust him, might be able to pull it off. In the distance, the pack was still discussing strategy. Jake could hear them moving through the biodome, testing different approaches and learning the new environment. They would be back soon, and when they returned, they would be ready for everything Jake had shown them so far. It was time to show them something completely new. Jake circled the lead Void Stalker while keeping track of the others in his peripheral vision. The creature was smart enough to know it was being maneuvered, but not sure how to respond to tactics it had never encountered before. Its pack instincts told it to coordinate with the others, but Jake was disrupting those patterns by keeping it separated from the group. The Academy's emergency protocols had sealed all the exits, which meant security could not get in, but the Void Stalkers could not get out either. Jake realized that the standard rescue procedures would not work here. The creatures would adapt to the environment long before help arrived, and they would eventually figure out how to hunt the students effectively. Professor Veltar, Jake called without taking his eyes off the nearest predator. How many Void Stalkers were being held in the research facility? 8 adults and 4 juveniles, she replied from behind the rocks where the students had taken shelter. Jake had counted 6 adults so far, which meant there were at least 2 more somewhere in the biodome, plus the younger ones. The pack was large enough to coordinate complex hunting strategies, and they were learning more about human behavior with every passing minute. He needed to change the dynamic before they completed their assessment and decided to attack in force. Moving slowly, Jake began backing toward a section of the forest where the artificial trees grew closer together. The Voidstalker followed, but its posture showed increasing caution. When Jake reached the tree line, he suddenly dove to his left and rolled behind a large artificial boulder. The Voidstalker rushed forward, expecting to catch him off balance, but Jake was already moving again. He came up behind a purple-barked tree with the metal rod ready. The creature skidded past his position and spun around, but Jake was no longer where it expected him to be. For the first time, the Voidstalker looked genuinely uncertain. It made a series of growling sounds that Jake interpreted as calls to the rest of the pack. Jake used the moment of distraction to examine his surroundings more carefully. The biodome was designed to look natural, but it was still an artificial environment with hidden maintenance systems. He spotted ventilation grates, drainage channels, and support structures that could be used to his advantage. More importantly, he found what he was looking for near a cluster of artificial rocks, a maintenance shed disguised to look like a natural cave formation. If he could reach it, there might be better tools inside. The problem was getting there without being cut off by the pack. Jake could see at least 4 Voidstalkers now positioning themselves to surround his location. They were adapting their tactics and treating him like a dangerous opponent rather than simple prey. 6, Jake called quietly. Can Centaurians climb trees? Yes, we are very good climbers, came the nervous reply. I need you to get to that tall tree near the maintenance shed and tell me what you can see from up there. You want me to leave the safe area? I need eyes above the pack. You are the only one who can move quietly enough. There was a long pause before Zix replied. I will try. Jake watched as his roommate emerged from behind the rocks and began moving through the trees with surprising grace. Centaurians might be prey species, but they were well adapted for escaping predators through difficult terrain. Zix reached the tall tree and climbed up into the artificial canopy. I can see 8 adult Voidstalkers, Zix reported. 4 are near your position. 2 are circling toward the maintenance shed. 2 more are watching the students. Jake had been right about the numbers. The pack was splitting up to cover multiple objectives, which meant they were smart enough to plan several moves ahead. He needed to disrupt their coordination before they could execute whatever strategy they were developing. Moving from tree to tree, Jake began working his way toward the maintenance shed. The 2 Voidstalkers near it had positioned themselves to cut off access, but they were assuming he would approach directly. Instead, Jake climbed up into the artificial canopy and began moving through the upper level of the forest. The artificial trees were designed to support maintenance workers, so they could hold his weight easily. Jake moved carefully from branch to branch, using techniques his father had taught him for hunting in dense forest. The key was to move slowly enough that small movements would not attract attention. From above, Jake could see the Voidstalkers more clearly. They were magnificent predators with powerful muscles, sharp claws, and intelligence that showed in their coordinated movements. Under other circumstances, he would have admired their hunting skills. Right now, he was more interested in finding ways to defeat them. Jake reached a position directly above the maintenance shed and saw that the 2 Voidstalkers below were not watching the canopy. Like most ground-based predators, they focused on threats at their own level. He waited for them to move to the far side of their patrol area before dropping down to the shed entrance. The maintenance shed was larger than it appeared from outside and contained exactly what Jake had hoped to find. Along with standard tools, there were emergency supplies including rope, cutting equipment, and materials for temporary repairs. Jake quickly gathered what he needed and stuffed items into his pockets and backpack. The most useful discovery was a coil of strong synthetic rope that was both lightweight and nearly impossible to break. Jake had used similar materials during rock climbing trips and knew how to work with it effectively. He also found an emergency beacon that could send a signal directly to Academy security, bypassing the automatic lockdown. Jake activated it and hoped that help would arrive before the situation got worse, but he was not counting on it. The Void Stalkers were getting more aggressive and coordinated with each passing minute. As Jake prepared to leave the shed, he heard the soft sound of claws on metal. One of the Void Stalkers had discovered his location and was approaching the entrance. Jake moved to the back of the shed and found a ventilation grate that opened to the outside. He squeezed through the grate just as the creature entered the front of the shed. From outside, Jake could hear it searching for his scent and making frustrated growling sounds. The pack was definitely learning to track him, which meant his advantages were disappearing. "Jake, where are you?" came Zix's voice from above. "Moving toward your position," Jake replied quietly. "How are the others doing?" "They are still safe behind the rocks, but the Void Stalkers are getting closer. Professor Veltar says the security signal was received, but rescue teams cannot override the lockdown remotely." Jake grimaced as he moved through the underbrush. The emergency protocols that were supposed to protect students were now trapping them with dangerous predators. He was going to have to solve this problem himself, which meant hunting creatures that were designed to be apex predators. Using the rope from the maintenance shed, Jake began setting up snares and trip lines between the trees. The Void Stalkers were intelligent, but they were also overconfident after dominating other species for millions of years. They might not expect prey to set traps for them. The first snare was simple, a loop of rope positioned along what looked like an obvious escape route from the student's position. Jake knew that when the pack finally decided to attack, they would try to cut off retreat paths. The snare was positioned to catch any creature moving fast through that area. The second trap was more complex. Jake rigged a deadfall using a heavy artificial rock balanced above a narrow passage between two large boulders. It would not kill a Void Stalker, but it might injure one enough to make the others more cautious. As he worked, Jake found himself thinking like his father had taught him during hunting trips. Every movement had to have purpose. Every decision had to consider what the prey would do next. The difference was that this time, Jake was not sure which side was the prey and which was the predator. Movement near the student position, Zix reported from his tree. 3 Void Stalkers are approaching from different directions. Jake abandoned his trap building and began moving toward the main group. If the pack was ready to attack, he needed to be in position to help. He moved through the trees as quickly as he could while still remaining quiet. When Jake reached a position where he could see the students, he realized the situation had changed dramatically. The Void Stalkers were no longer just stalking. They were actively hunting. 2 creatures approached from the front while a third circled around to attack from behind. The students were pressed together behind their rock formation, and Jake could see that several of them were shaking with fear. Professor Veltar was trying to contact security again, but her hands were trembling so badly she could barely operate her device. Jake needed to act before the pack completed their attack formation. He dropped down from the trees and landed behind. the Void Stalker that was circling to the rear. The creature spun around to face him, surprised by his sudden appearance. Instead of backing away, Jake stepped forward and swung the metal rod in a wide arc. The Void Stalker dodged back, but Jake kept advancing. He was no longer trying to avoid conflict. He was initiating it on his own terms. The creature snarled and showed its teeth, but it also backed away from Jake's aggressive approach. The other two Void Stalkers heard the commotion and turned to see what was happening. Their coordinated attack was disrupted by Jake's unexpected intervention. The biodome was the pride of Nexus Prime Academy. It stretched across several acres and contained different environments from dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy. Professor Veltar led her class through the main entrance where the air suddenly became warm and humid. Jake could smell earth-growing plants and something else that reminded him of the deep woods back home. Today we will observe tracking techniques in a controlled environment, Professor Veltar announced to the group of 20 students. The biodome contains sensor drones that mimic the behavior of various prey animals. Your assignment is to observe how different hunting methods work in different terrains. The class walked along a pathway that wound through sections representing different planetary environments. They passed through a desert area with red sand and strange rock formations, then entered a forest zone with trees that had purple bark and leaves that glowed softly in the dim light. Jake felt more comfortable here than he had since arriving at the academy. The forest section reminded him of camping trips with his father in the mountains of Washington. Even though the plants were alien, the feeling was familiar. He noticed things that the other students missed, the way certain bushes had been disturbed, small marks on tree trunks, and the direction of broken twigs on the ground. The first demonstration will show ambush hunting, Professor Veltar said as they reached a clearing. Sensor drones programmed to act like Altarian forest deer will be released. Tracking drones will demonstrate how solitary predators hunt. She activated a control device, and several small flying objects emerged from hidden compartments in the trees. The sensor drones looked like tiny deer with 6 legs and moved through the clearing in a nervous, jerky way that was very realistic. A larger drone appeared from behind a rock formation and began stalking the prey drones. The students watched as the predator drone used the terrain to stay hidden while getting closer to its target. Jake found himself automatically analyzing the hunt, noting how the drone positioned itself downwind and used shadows for concealment. Notice how the predator waits for the optimal moment, Professor Veltar explained. Patience is crucial for successful hunting. Suddenly, alarm lights began flashing throughout the biodome. A loud warning sound echoed from speakers hidden in the artificial rocks and trees. Professor Veltar looked at her control device with confusion. "There seems to be a technical malfunction," she said. "Please remain calm while I contact maintenance." Before she could use her communication device, something large and dark moved through the trees at the edge of the clearing. It was not a drone. Jake saw sleek black fur, powerful muscles, and yellow eyes that reflected the emergency lighting. The creature was about the size of a large dog but moved like a cat, and it was definitely real. "Void Stalker," whispered one of the students in a voice full of terror. More shapes appeared at the edges of the clearing. Jake counted at least 4 of the creatures, possibly more hidden in the dense vegetation. They moved with the fluid grace of natural predators, and their attention was focused entirely on the group of students. Professor Veltar tried to activate the emergency protocols, but her control device was not responding. "Everyone move slowly. Toward the exit," she said, but Jake could hear the fear in her voice. The students began to back away from the creatures, but their movements were stiff and unnatural. Jake recognized the signs of panic setting in. Zix was shaking so badly he could barely walk. Cora had her hand on what looked like a ceremonial weapon, but she seemed frozen in place. One of the Void Stalkers stepped into the clearing and made a sound like a growl mixed with a hiss. The other students stopped moving completely. Jake realized that their prey instincts were taking over and making them unable to think clearly. He forced himself to stay calm and observe the situation like his father had taught him during hunting trips. The Void Stalkers were pack hunters, and they were positioning themselves to cut off escape routes. The main exit was already blocked by two of the creatures. The emergency exits were probably watched as well. Jake moved slowly toward Professor Veltar while keeping his eyes on the nearest Void Stalker. "How many emergency exits are there?" he asked quietly. "3 main exits and 2 maintenance passages," she replied in a shaky voice. "But the emergency lockdown has sealed everything automatically." "How long until security arrives?" "The biodome is isolated for safety reasons. It could be 30 minutes or more." Jake felt his heart rate increase, but not from fear. It was the feeling he got when tracking elk in the wilderness, focused alertness mixed with excitement. His father had called it hunter mode and warned him that it made him think differently than normal. The lead Void Stalker took another step forward, and the students pressed closer together. Jake noticed that the creature was testing their reactions, looking for signs of weakness or panic. It was intelligent enough to evaluate threats before attacking. "Professor, do any of these creatures hunt humans?" Jake asked. "Void Stalkers are opportunistic predators. They will attack any prey they think they can take down." Jake nodded and began to move differently. Instead of backing away like the others, he shifted his weight to the balls of his feet and let his arms hang loose at his sides. He turned his head to scan the tree line without moving his body, using his peripheral vision to track multiple threats at once. The change in his posture was subtle, but the lead Void Stalker noticed immediately. Its ears flattened against its head and it stopped advancing. For a moment, Predator and human stared at each other across the clearing. "Jake, what are you doing?" Zix whispered. "Being something other than prey," Jake replied without taking his eyes off the Void Stalker. The creature tilted its head and studied Jake with obvious intelligence. It was trying to decide if this strange two-legged being was dangerous or just different. Jake knew that the next few seconds would determine whether the pack attacked or looked for easier targets. He took a slow step forward instead of backward. The Void Stalker immediately crouched lower and bared its teeth, but it also backed up slightly. Jake could hear gasps from the other students behind him. "He is challenging it," Cora said with amazement in her voice. "Humans do not challenge predators," another student protested. "Prey species flee or hide." "Jake is not acting like prey," Professor Veltar observed. The standoff continued for several long seconds before the lead Void Stalker made its decision. It backed into the trees and gave a series of barks and growls that Jake assumed were communication with the rest of the pack. The other creatures began to move, but they were no longer positioning themselves for an attack. They were repositioning to get a better look at this unusual potential prey. Jake took advantage of their confusion to quickly scan the area for anything useful. The biodome was designed to be as natural as possible, but there were still maintenance features hidden throughout. He spotted what looked like a tool storage compartment built into a large artificial rock formation about 20 meters away. "I need everyone to move very slowly toward that rock," he said quietly. "Do not run and do not make sudden movements. Stay close together, but give me room to maneuver." "What are you planning to do?" Professor Veltar asked. "Something that will probably get me in trouble with Academy regulations," Jake replied. As the group began to move, the Void Stalkers followed at a distance. They were clearly confused by Jake's behavior and were treating the situation as if they were encountering a new type of predator rather than prey. This confusion was buying them time, but Jake knew it would not last long. When they reached the rock formation, Jake found the hidden panel and opened it with his student access card. Inside were basic maintenance tools. Nothing that looked like a weapon, but Jake had learned to work with what was available. He pulled out a metal rod that was probably used for adjusting equipment and tested its weight and balance. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. He also found some heavy cables that could be useful. "Jake, you cannot seriously be thinking of fighting those creatures," Professor Veltar said. "Actually, I am thinking of hunting them." Jake replied as he wound one of the cables around his left arm. "The difference is important." The student stared at him as if he had announced his intention to fly to one of the moons. Even Cora looked shocked. "Humans do not hunt Void Stalkers," she said. "Military units hunt Void Stalkers with advanced weapons and armor." "Maybe your military units do, but I am not military," Jake said as he checked the area around them for defensive positions. "I am just someone who grew up in places where you learn to deal with dangerous animals, or you do not survive." One of the Void Stalkers appeared at the edge of the clearing again, and this time it was not alone. Jake counted 6 of them now, and he suspected there were more in the trees. The pack had decided that despite his strange behavior, the humans were still potential prey. "Everyone get behind that cluster of rocks," Jake instructed. "Professor Veltar, keep trying to contact security. Everyone else look for anything that could be used as a weapon or tool." As the students moved to defensive positions, Jake stepped away from the group and began to circle toward the nearest Void Stalker. His movements were fluid and purposeful, and he kept the metal rod ready but not threatening. The transport ship landed on Nexus Prime with a soft hum that barely disturbed the morning air. Jake Morrison stepped out carrying only a worn backpack and looked around at the most beautiful planet he had ever seen. The sky was a soft purple color, and 2 small moons hung in the daylight like pale ghosts. Everything felt lighter here because the gravity was less than Earth normal. Trees with silver leaves swayed in the gentle breeze and made music like wind chimes. The Galactic Academy rose before him like something from a dream. Tall spires of white crystal reached toward the sky, and floating platforms moved students between the buildings. Jake had seen pictures, but being here felt different. His boots made soft sounds on the smooth walkway as he headed toward the main entrance. Other students moved past him in groups, talking in languages he could not understand. Most of the alien students wore formal robes in different colors that showed which species they belonged to. Jake felt out of place in his simple clothes, dark pants, a plain shirt, and a jacket that had seen many camping trips back home. Some students stopped talking when they saw him and pointed with whatever they used for fingers. He caught the word human in several conversations. The main hall was huge with a ceiling that seemed to go up forever. Holographic displays showed information in dozens of languages, and Jake was glad his translator implant worked well. He found the registration desk where a tall being with 4 arms and blue skin smiled at him. "Welcome to Nexus Prime Academy," the being said, in perfect English. "You must be Jake Morrison from Earth. I am Administrator Quinn. We are very excited to have our first human student here." Jake nodded and tried to smile back. "Thank you. I am happy to be here." Your housing assignment is ready and your class schedule has been prepared. Professor Veltar will be your advisor. She teaches interspecies behavioral studies and has been very interested in meeting you. Administrator Quinn handed Jake a small device that would help him find his way around campus. The dormitory was in the east wing, and Jake's room was on the third floor. As he walked through the halls, more students stared at him. Some looked curious, others seemed worried, and a few appeared almost scared. His roommate was already in the room when Jake arrived. The being looked like a large rabbit that could walk on two legs and had hands instead of paws. Soft gray fur covered most of his body, and his ears twitched when he saw Jake. "Hello," the being said in a quiet voice. "I am Zix from Centaurus 5. You must be the human I heard about." "Yes, I am Jake. Nice to meet you, Zix." Zix stepped back a little, and his ears flattened against his head. "I hope you do not mind me asking, but is it true that humans come from a death world?" Jake had heard this question before during his preparation for the exchange program. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world by galactic standards, which meant it was considered extremely dangerous for most forms of life. Earth can be dangerous, but we have learned to live there. It is home to us. I have read that your planet has predators that hunt in packs and storms that can destroy entire cities. How do you survive such things? Jake unpacked his few belongings while he thought about how to answer. We adapt, we learn, we work together. Most of the dangerous things you read about do not happen every day. Zix seemed to relax a little, but still kept his distance. I have also heard that humans are predators themselves. Is that true? Some humans hunt for food, yes. But we also grow crops and raise animals for food. We are what you might call omnivores. Next morning, Jake attended his first class, which was Introduction to Galactic Civilizations. The classroom was arranged in circles with the professor in the center. Jake noticed that students from the same species sat together and there were clear spaces between different groups. When he entered, conversation stopped, and many eyes turned to look at him. Professor Veltar was an Altarian with pale skin that seemed to glow softly and large, dark eyes that reminded Jake of deer. She was tall and moved with fluid grace that made her seem like she was floating. "Class, we have a special guest today," she announced. "This is Jake Morrison from Earth, our first human exchange student. Jake, would you like to tell the class something about yourself?" Jake stood up and felt dozens of eyes watching him. "My name is Jake Morrison. I come from the northwestern region of North America on Earth. I grew up in a small town near mountains and forests. I like hiking, fishing, and camping. I am here to learn about other species and cultures." A student with red skin and what looked like armor plating raised her hand. "I am Cora from Vega Prime. I have heard that humans are warriors. Is this true? Some humans are soldiers, yes, but most of us are not. We have farmers, teachers, doctors, artists, and many other jobs just like other species." "But you said you like hunting activities like fishing," Cora continued. "On my world, only the warrior caste is allowed to hunt. Fishing and camping are recreational activities for humans. Many of us do them for fun or to relax." The class seemed shocked by this idea. Professor Veltar stepped in to explain. "Class, this is exactly why cultural exchange is so important. What seems normal to one species may be completely foreign to another. Jake, your next class is Predator and Prey Dynamics. I think you will find it very interesting." After class, Zix walked with Jake toward the next building. I did not know humans hunt for fun, he said. On my world, only the most desperate animals hunt. The rest of us eat plants and fruits. What do centaurians do for fun? Jake asked. We enjoy music, mathematics, and philosophy. We also like to solve puzzles and create art with light and sound. They reached the Predator and Prey Dynamics classroom, which was in the Natural Sciences building. This room was different from the first one. It had viewing screens that showed footage of different animals hunting and being hunted. Some students looked uncomfortable watching the displays. Professor Veltar entered and began the lesson. Today we will discuss hunting strategies across different species. Most galactic civilizations evolved from prey species, so this topic can be difficult to understand on an instinctive level. We study it because understanding predator behavior helps us protect ourselves and our colonies. She activated a holographic display that showed a pack of wolf-like creatures hunting together. These are Fenris wolves from the Sigma system. Notice how they coordinate their attack without apparent communication. Each member of the pack knows their role instinctively. Jake watched the display with interest. The hunting behavior reminded him of wolves back on Earth, though these creatures were larger and had 6 legs instead of 4. Can anyone tell me why pack hunting is so effective? Professor Veltar asked. Several students raised their hands but seemed uncertain. Finally, Cora spoke up. Because there are more of them than there is prey. That is part of it, but not the complete answer. Jake, you grew up around predators on Earth. What is your observation? Jake thought carefully before answering. Pack. Hunting works because each animal has a job to do. Some chase the prey toward others who are waiting. Some cut off escape routes. They work together like a team where everyone knows their part without being told. The class turned to stare at Jake again. Professor Veltar nodded approvingly. Excellent observation. This kind of coordinated behavior requires both intelligence and instinct working together. It is quite rare in the galaxy. But how do they know what to do without talking to each other? Asked another student. Jake found himself answering before he thought about it. Body language, positioning, and experience. When you hunt together often enough, you learn to read the signs and know what your partners are thinking. The silence in the room was complete. Finally, Zix whispered, Jake, are you speaking from personal experience? Jake realized what he had said and felt heat rise in his cheeks. I have done some hunting back home, yes. Small game mostly. Professor Veltar looked very interested. Jake, would you be willing to share more about human hunting practices with the class tomorrow? I think it would be very educational. I suppose so, if you think it would help. As class ended, Jake noticed that students were looking at him differently now. Some seemed more afraid than before, while others appeared fascinated. Cora approached him as they left the classroom. Human Jake, I would like to know more about your hunting experiences. On Vega Prime, warriors respect other warriors. Perhaps we could talk sometime. Jake nodded, though he was not sure what he had gotten himself into. All he had done was answer some questions about hunting, but it seemed like a much bigger deal to everyone else. Walking back to the dormitory with Zix, Jake noticed how his roommate stayed a little further away than before. Zix, are you afraid of me now? The Centaurian's ears twitched. Not afraid exactly, but I am beginning to understand why your planet is called a death world. The way you spoke about hunting was very different from how we study it in books. That night, Jake lay in his bed looking out at the alien stars and wondering if coming to Nexus Prime had been a mistake. He had wanted to learn about other species and share human culture, But it seemed like every time he spoke honestly about his life on Earth, he frightened people. Tomorrow he would have to talk about hunting to the entire class, and he had a feeling that things were about to become much more complicated.